This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial, and I think it's the 10th. We're still doing things from my office. The radio station is not so good for virus because it has microphones and boards that can hide viruses. So we're doing from remote. I want to warn my audience that we're doing something different today. We're in contact with Jacinta, who is a director of a gallery, and she will say something about this at some date. But she has offered to have a gallery of our prints, and a lot of you are familiar with our high contrast prints, and that's what we're working with. And so Jacinta is wanting to interview me so that she can display that image when there is an open house or when people are around. I think that's enough to let you know. So I'll ask Jacinta to introduce herself and say what she does, and then she will interview me. Then I hope we will go into some informal discussion that you could probably pull a little piece from if you wanted to. So then I will introduce Jacinta, or I'll ask her to introduce herself. You're on.
Ron. Good morning, David. Greetings from Australia. And it's Sunday morning here. And thank you very much for the invitation to talk to you this morning or your afternoon. I'm a director of Art Partners Australia. It's an art gallery that works with 35 artists, and we get commissions for artworks and mainly provide the health hospitals with original artworks by the 35 artists. We've been operating for about 4 years now, and operate in Albury, New South Wales, Australia. So it's a great job, and I meet a lot of interesting people, people like yourself.
Well, it's wonderful for us to have this sort of connection.
Yes, and your lovely sister lives not far away. She lives about 10 minutes from my gallery and pops in from time to time, Dorothy.
Yes, the family is very appreciative of you doing this. Prints that have been sitting for quite some time get to be expressing themselves on people's walls.
Yes, well, I was working away in my gallery, and Dorothy came in some time ago and said, Jacinta, you need to see my brother's beautiful artworks. And I said, Dorothy, just send me a photo and I'll have a look and we can go from there. Dorothy came in with a box of your beautiful prints, and from that day, the box remains here because I won't let them out the door. They're so lovely. So wow. They're really good. They're really good work. So no one's seen them. So they go on exhibition on Thursday. And we've called the exhibition Wanderings of a Prairie Monk. So everyone's getting quite excited, but I'm not showing anyone. It's full of excitement. Can I ask you a couple of questions, David, if you don't mind? Yes. So you describe yourself as a dual citizen. How have the influences of both countries affected your art and your passion for the environment? And what took you to the United States?
That was a very good question. I haven't thought about that sort of thing, but we're colonials, very two different countries. One is the U.S., which is very rich in glacial soils and very attractive for entrepreneurs, as well as peasants who were escaping things like potato famines. And when the British lost contact with the U.S., they went to Australia. Australia, on the other hand, is a very poor country with poor soils and mountains that are not nearly as lucrative for agriculture, especially. So you have those two backgrounds. So the Australian is more rough and tumble than much of the US. The US has a range of people ranging from very affluent people to not so affluent people. And there was a slave industry there that has caused a civil war and a lot of disjunct between the wealthy and the poor. The Australians had something similar when convicts went there. The area around Sydney where the convicts were settled was very poor, and actually the Aboriginals more or less saved their lives because they taught them how to live frugally and it changed, however, when the Aboriginals got to realize that their lands were being taken over. The same thing happened here with native Indian population that was somewhat more developed than the Australian Aboriginal. The Australian Aboriginal is more or less a very well-educated Stone Age person. And didn't have much to protect themselves from guns and technology. The native population in America was very resistant, and that led to wars, and it led to different tribes mingling with each other as they were pushed west. With that background, you get to be curious. The world is curious about the US. They're not quite sure what happens here, and so part of my coming here was curiosity and yes. Wonder. I've been very glad to be here. How it affects my art is that I've been able to do it without having to be an art specialist. My mother was an artist. She was English in background, Cockney from in London, and so I have that background. My father was a primary school teacher, but he had been a congregational minister for 5 years until he felt that his church expected more godliness of him than he was more interested in moral code. So with that background, I came with curiosity, and I've been able to do that and to also combine disciplines. I have an agriculture degree from the University of Sydney and an education diploma. So I came to do a master's degree, but I also came to find the ecology of a prairie, and actually it has been largely taken over. So some of my work became applied, and yes. So my prints are saying to local people, this is interesting. It might be something you're walking past every day and you don't notice. And
Can I ask what's been the response to your silk prints? It's a universal medium, and your work obviously carries a strong message of conservation and preservation.
Yes. So my images are to encourage. The state has preserved very little of this prairie, and so I want to make species aware. Uh, I want to have people be advocates for the prairie uh,
Yes.
when they're more likely to be advocates for their own business and farming, and there's a conflict there. But yes, I tend to look at the landscape and dream about it and its history, with the settlement patterns, and I teach outdoor education, and reading the landscape, and then uh, someone from the School of the Art Institute in Chicago came by and said, "Let's do an artist in the landscape." So uh, that has been rather wonderful. Uh, I wanted to combine the three disciplines of art, education, and science. And when
Right.
you combine, you're not nearly as good at any one of them. So I'm not really an art specialist, but I can walk into the Art Institute and feel at home. I don't have to explain what I'm doing and who it's there. So yes, it has had an influence on me, and my people who I interact with. Uh, it's a medium that inspires young children. Uh, we do seminars. I will take a 4-year-old and
Yes.
teach them how to squeegee across a piece of uh, brown paper uh, with holes in it for a house and a tree and a bird, or and they will get to be able to take a little piece of cardboard and some ink, and the
I,
tree will be green, and the house will be red, and the bird will perhaps be some other color, and then they can make 10 prints of that. So then you get to the next level where you make a stencil that is held together by silk, and the silk is blocked by some means, and then you can squeegee across the space and print that way, and that brings in people who are 14-year-olds, and they have a twinkle in their eye, and you have some teamwork, because this is a fairly primitive tool. It's in schools, they know about it, but when you get 5 people together putting in a paper, uh, shouting at each other, and it gets to be a very friendly thing to do. And then you get into the adult area where it's something the same. It's a little bit more sophisticated, but it is uh, wonderful. And these people buy these images because I think one of the images that you have is of a barn. And so barns were a big deal when early settlement had cattle. But gradually they morphed into row crops, which are more
yes.
lucrative. And so barns became obsolete. So that barn is labeled a retired barn because it is retired. And now it becomes a cherished piece of the landscape because the barns have disappeared. Some people live in them. Or redesign them so that they can live in them. And
It's recording history, really, isn't it? That's what I really like about your artwork. It allows the viewer to put their own imagination into the picture. So you've captured really well. It's lovely to sit there and look at your work and think deeply about it. Is this the aim when you create the prints? Is to engage the viewer?
yes, absolutely. If I look at fence lines, for instance, I want to tell people about the fence line. If it's an older fence line, it'll have posts that are drawn from a, 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 a windbreak of trees, so that the posts are curly and not upright often because they're in soft glacial soils that are not stable unless you put a bunch of concrete around them. And they didn't have that in their day. So an old fence is very different from a new fence. And so, and there are headlands. You have to imagine a horse and plowing, and they couldn't plow right up to the fence line. So some of our original prairie plants are in those headlands. And
Right.
one of them has milk. So one is a milkweed. All the plants that were prairie plants didn't really provide fodder until middle of summer. So the European settlers brought their seed, and they had hay crops which would yield throughout the year, but also they could have calves drop early in the spring and get their cattle underway. So the headlands were where they started to plow for agriculture. And if you look at one screen, it's an older fence line. You'll see milkweeds growing onto the fence line, and then you have to think about the milk green. You have to think about it opening. It has a bunch of silks like a cotton ball, and protecting the seeds, and the seeds are nutritious, and this is an interesting plant. But when you started to do agriculture, this was a weed. Many of the prairie plants are named weeds, warts, curses, or banes because they were in competition with agriculture and not awfully productive as far as the agricultural community was concerned. So there's that little bit of history in that headline.
Yes.
You have to imagine a horse and plow, single horse and plow. These days you plow 10 moldboards in a row.
Yes.
But in those days you did it, and you knew the horses, and the horses knew when to turn around, so there's that feeling there, and a lot of it is unspoken. But people who've been around for a while, they know it, and it's their forte, and they not only enjoy a print, but they enjoy making them too. And so you have to teach them to go out like the last few days. There has been rime ice. That is where fog freezes on the landscape, and it makes it look like a jewel community. And people are out there with cameras, and they have to do it before it burns off. But yes, so there's an involvement that is tremendous.
It's lovely to be able to incorporate your interest of agriculture and art. They're both so exciting areas, and I'm involved in both and always have been. And it's a great marriage. Talking about the art again, how different is the art scene in the US compared to Australia, especially in these difficult times? Are people investing in art, or how hard is it for the artist?
The artists are having a hard time at the moment,
right?
Because they're dependent on people gathering together, and the virus industry does not want people to be getting together.
Yes,
and so you're dependent on Zoom and other organizational techniques, but it's far different from me talking to you, and it's a good substitute. But music, especially, we're next door to a radio station that will be broadcasting this program, and they've been doing it for 40 years. So
yes.
we, and they have a twinkle in their eye, and they're near to a university, and they're new to a community that is very multi-dimensional, and they give room for a gospel person. Before my program on Sunday, there will be gospel people, and they will be singing and dancing, and I love to dance too, and so we interact together even in the virus time. But I do have a street outside that is closed off for a restaurant in the street, so that you don't go into the restaurant. You get lots of air and hopefully no virus. And I have a bar across the road. We did have a pocket prairie there that was wonderful. People would go around and a little bit of forest, a little bit of edge timber, a little bit of prairie, and they'd come out and wow. So that has been replaced by a beer garden. So we're in the middle of gentrification, and the big big buildings going up around us, and we look like country cousins. But it's okay. There are people who love us, and there are some people who don't love us because we're in competition. If we buy up an old railroad bed, then we're in competition with agriculture. That should look at that and say that's X number of rows of corn and soybeans, and
Yes,
so we're yin and yang.
yin
Uh,
and yang. Well, we're very excited to be displaying 33 of your lovely works next Thursday, or this coming Thursday. The exhibition opens, and the title "Wanderings of a Prairie Monk." What do you hope people will take away from viewing the exhibition?
That is the question. These countries had to develop. They first came with rivers, so uh, people came up the Murray River with boats and eventually pedal steamers, or right up to Albury. The, the same happened in the U.S. But just as the uh, canals were getting to peak, the railroads came in. And so most of the settlers that came here and most of the settlers in Australia came with railroads. There were no roads. If you were in the Midwest, it was very swampy because of the leakage of water from continental glaciers. And so if you had roads, it was very muddy. You get bogged very easily. So railroads brought people to town. So railroad depots, railroad sidings, they're all uh, helpful, and sometimes they're very good for trails. The mainline railroads are still working. For instance, from Los Angeles to Chicago to New York, uh, uh, freights freight containers can go from uh, Asia to uh, 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 the States and through to Europe. You have a new railroad line going in from Melbourne through to Brisbane. It'll go up the ridge behind near to Armidale. So you have railroads that are working, but the little railroads that brought people to town, and they were every 5 miles, so a horse wouldn't be would be able to pull grain 8 miles to an elevator, but not be exhausted. So those are obsolete, and we buy up those old railroad beds for trails. And on if the right of way is 100 feet wide, on either side of the uh, ballast, there is native prairie, and one of those prairies we have locally uh, was an initiation for the Nature Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy is now worldwide, and it has just bought a whole bunch of land in Australia that's more or less dry land, just north on perhaps on the Murrumbidgee, but uh, so you look for these sorts of organizations that you can encourage into action, and they amaze you sometimes and take off. We have one that's called the Grand Prairie Friends, and they've now got 1,000 acres of mixed prairie and forest. And the one railroad bed that we're working on, especially, we were aware that bicycle people were buying these trails, so we bought the trails with the help of people, and then the federal government decided that they wanted to keep some of these corridors too, and they could use uh, rail trails. So this particular 25 miles is drawing in $12 million from the federal government, and then the local states, and the local uh, uh, citizens, volunteers have put together. So that a particular project is running about $2 million, $20 million at the moment, and so toilets go here, pictures go there. So if you ask me what I would do in Albury, it would be I look at that railroad line, which was basically put in up to the Mount Kosciuszko, so that they could take equipment for the Snowy Mountain
Snowy Mountains.
SMHEA. What is this? Snowy Mountain Hydroelectric Association, and Hume Reservoir, and so it takes years, but you have interested parties that interpret the trails. There are those people who want to use it for physical back and forth. They're exercising. There are other people who want to find out about that little weed that's on the side of the trail, and then you take a photograph, and then you take a high contrast for it, and you teach them how to do it, and you say, well, look at that plant in a shade, squint your eyes and figure out how it would work, and how you could lose some of the information that's detailed, and then let other people put their own imagination into it. So yes, I would like to see the trail that goes from Wodonga up to Tantagara, I think it is, and on, go up to the Snowy Mountain, and have little pieces of artwork, uh, uh, shops, restaurants, all sorts of things there. And it takes perhaps 50 or 100 years to do this. So you have to put together skeletons now for future. And
Yes.
and that's what we are involved in. And you don't know what the future generations are going to do with it. They'll do their own thing, but you have to have a skeleton there, or if the
Well, it's recording history, isn't it, for our future generations?
yes. So
It is very much so. Your artwork, what percentage of artwork have you done in the US and versus Australia? Have you done most of your artwork in Australia in the 70s?
well, I have been in Australia quite a bit, and so there's a balance between the two. Uh, I'm thinking it might be handy to have a little corner with some a slideshow of what a prairie is, so that people will understand what the images are.
Yes.
Because I don't know what a prairie is. It has in the fall, and we've just come through the fall. The tall grasses are 8 and 10 feet tall, and they wave in the wind. Just as you put wind across a prairie, across a field of wheat, you'll see it move in different
It's
directions.
dancing, isn't it?
Dancing.
Yeah.
There, you got it.
Yeah.
So a prairie does that, but a prairie also has 100 different species, and so I would show you just a slideshow of those species, and visitors could look, not look, but sometimes there's something like that in a corner is rather helpful.
Yes, to explain.
Yeah. I've been reading about the Chaffee brothers that brought irrigation to the riverina.
Right.
But right now, people are taking water out at the top end. So Renmark and down near the Australian Bight are getting starved of water. So
Yes.
there's political discussions here.
There's a lot of political discussions here too.
So they're interesting, and so we're in the middle of that sort of thing, and so sometimes we have to speak of that, and perhaps that's what my program does to some extent, is talk to issues. They might be whether you can take a bicycle across two towns, and can you do it so safely? So you're talking about active railroad lines with a trail along the side. If it's out in the boondocks, we don't like that because it takes away the native vegetation that we're trying to save on either side. So we have to find other ways around roads. So you have to be a regional planner and figure out.
And people tend to want to bushwalk off roads. They'd rather walk through the bush than
Yes.
on roads with vehicles and transport. It's nice to get off those roads.
My parents were in Blacksland on the Blue Mountains, and
Yes.
people were starting to allow native vegetation to survive. And yes, there was that problem. You had to put a trail in so that people would not just walk over everything. But here,
Yes.
sometimes we do let people walk freely, because a buffalo would do that and just walk back and forth across a landscape without making an alligator trail. So there's no right way. There's
That's right.
a lot of different ways, and little animals eat other little animals, and and so it can be a rather cruel landscape and ecology, but you have to understand it, and understanding it is rather wonderful.
It's been amazing listening to you talk this morning.
So let me ask you some questions of yourself now. You understand agriculture. Did you come from a farming community?
My family were involved in farming, yes, and my husband and I have been on the land for the last 30 years with merino wool, merino sheep, and beef cattle, Hereford cattle. So yes, and our 3 children have all been brought up on the farm. So I understand what you're talking about.
Yes. So where are you are you near to Albury?
No, we've been in Albury. We've been in this area for 30 years.
Uh-huh.
So we've moved from farm into Albury Township. Albury's Wodonga's a population of 100,000 people, and it's a good part of the world. It's a lovely location between Sydney and Melbourne. And you spoke about trains. We have a great airport that allows, well, it did until the last 12 months. It's tightened up a little bit since then.
I can't come to Australia because
that's right.
All the planes are grounded, and the few that are running, people are sitting very far apart. So
everyone's abiding.
How did you get such a wonderful name?
A wonderful name?
Yes.
I think it's Spanish. Jacinta.
It's Spanish. Oh, you have a Spanish background too?
No, I don't. No. Irish background, but I'm not quite sure. I can't ask my mother. She's not here these days. But,
that's right.
Yeah,
so you
it's
have
a tricky name.
My father was the 14th child when you in the end of the 1890s. It was a Victorian era, and children were the workforce, and often they died. But then medicine came in, and they all survived, and then you got a population increase, and so we don't have so many children as a result, and it's growing up in that sort of atmosphere of a white Australia with child endowment. You got paid for having a white child, and there was conflict. I can remember the days when people in Kempsey on the coast were out there with sorting out their lobster pots because the Japanese people were down there looking for food, and they would empty out the lobster pots. That's changed a lot. We have instead of having 2 or 3 people get an idea and getting it into action, you're getting an internet with a lot of people with a lot of information, and they're talking to each other on cell phones, and it's happened in a very short time. So things are changing, whether it's here or Australia or Ethiopia or wherever. And how do we handle that? That's part of what we talk about, and we try to listen. A lot of this is finding out by listening, but you have to give enough of yourself that people trust you, and then they explode with their own information, and it's kind of marvelous. And the artwork helps with this. You get to talk to people about different things. So talking is good.
Artwork's a great way to express
Yes, yes.
All sorts of things, through from happiness to mental health to I think during COVID times, the art shops have certainly sold a lot of art supplies because people can't go anywhere. So they've been at home creating their own pieces of art.
They've been listening to music for the first time.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah. It's been rather wonderful to be in a place where there is a larger population. So you get people. I was amazed one day. I sat in a meeting with 3 Nobel Prize winners, and
Wow.
that interaction, they may be specialists in a certain field, but you know that those people are thinking and dreaming. And then you have to stop off long enough to not be just dreaming all the time. You have to be actually involved in picking up a shovel and planting a plant, sowing a seed. And so people get really involved. And one of the things they get involved with is fire, because the prairies were subject to lightning fires. And the native population knew that. And if the lightning didn't come, they lit the fires. They knew how to light them. And the world at large has been afraid of fires, and they've had protection of fires, but it's part of the ecology. So you have to be a little bit educated to light a fire. You just might burn down that barn that you're trying to save. So you just can't walk in with a match and set fire to a prairie. You have to work with it so that
controlled burning.
Yes.
Yes.
So we burned 10 square feet first, and we watch the wind, because the wind can change, and
word.
You can get these tremendous tornado-like experiences where bark can be lifted up and go 3 miles and land on your house. And wow, where did that come from?
Australia went through that last year. This time last year, Australia went through, drastic yes, fires.
My parents did, and lost a lot of their last retreat to fires on the Blue Mountain. So.
Yes, well, Blue Mountains had fires again last year. This time last year. So
you're in downtown Albury.
Yes.
And I have to give you a lot of credentials for doing this, because it's not easy to put in a gallery.
It's not.
I'm very familiar. It's hard work, and so I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate that your husband can be in the background and perhaps do some electronic work too. And so we've been back and forth to try and figure out how to do this, because I'm only on the cusp, because I don't have an educated 10-year-old to do to tell me what to do. So
I think through COVID, through the last 12 months, my husband's involved in the sheep industry in Canberra. He's on boards in Canberra for the sheep industry. So he has done a lot of Zoom meetings and hasn't been in Canberra all year. So they were starting to get back to a few meetings face to face, but that's now changed again in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. No one's doing face to face meetings again. It's stopped.
So are your sheep wool sheep, I think, or meat sheep?
Both meat sheep I'll see if he's here and he can have a talk to you as well.
Okay.
Chris? Here he comes now. So he can have a talk to you about the sheep farming. So we'll talk about art and farming, both your passions.
Yes.
So here he is. I'll turn that around. So we're just talking about agriculture and about art and David's passion for both. So I was just saying to David...
I noticed you went to Yanko Ag College.
Yes. And that was an interesting experience on the Murrumbidgee. And we did drama and art there too, because I went to Hurlston Agricultural College in near to Sydney. And when I was assigned to teaching, they sent me to Yanko. So I got to work with a population of boarding school kids that don't get to travel around very much. And so to bring them other things like art and drama was important for me. And so with your sheep, do you have shearing sheds? How are you organizing your shearing these days? If I were in Australia and I was trying to teach an American what a sheep is, I would have a sheep, and I would have a crowd of sheep, and I would have a pony and a dog that would bring the sheep together, and there would be a shearing shed. And so tell me a little bit about what you do and what you're doing at a national level, because wool has been replaced by plastic, and how do you survive?
Yeah, well, you've raised a number of great questions. The wool market at the moment has deteriorated just in recent times, with China reducing its purchases. China purchases most of Australia's wool for processing over in China, and then it gets turned into tops or in yarn fabric and then gets sent around the world. So we've got the smallest sheep flock now that we've had for a long, long time, unfortunately, through successive droughts, and also the rise of productivity with cropping has displaced a number of sheep farmers.
Yeah.
So we have about 63 million sheep in Australia at the moment. And back in our heyday, we had well over 100 million. In the States, I think you've got about 5 million sheep, so again, very small flock. The United States is our second largest market now for sheep meat, particularly high quality lamb, which is terrific. With the work that I do, so I managed sheep farms or sheep stations in the corporate world for 30 odd years, and then retired from that and got involved in research and development and got involved in boards of management for research and development. And now I'm involved more in agri-politics, advocating for the sheep industry with policy and advocacy and driving productivity gains.
So are you also an artist?
Definitely not.
So
I will have built the wall that your art will be hanging on.
Okay. Well, we're.
We can't have two artists in the family. Someone has to go out and earn the living. And I enjoy my job.
So I have to watch the clock a little bit, because the not-for-profit radio station is rather wonderful. It has been in action for 40 years. It only goes 50 miles, but it is a very good music station because we're close to a university. There's a lot of talent, and we have community actions that are significant, and they get on there, and they need a little bit of time to press their issue or whatever it's doing. And the radio station is serviced to some extent by a television station, which is owned by the we have two Twin Cities, and one is Champaign and one is Urbana. And Urbana has takes in not-for-profit corporations and tells people what they do, and they get a visual side of things. So when you get set up with your gallery, we might be glad to get a few minutes of video that can go out on video rather than with just radio. So we're going on radio at the moment, but you get our images. If it was a different era, I would have gurus that come and help me put pictures into the radio program. So if a map is important, then it goes in. If a picture is important, it's worth 1,000 words. So we work with that, and you probably do the same, I think. So I think I'm going to close out now and leave room for both WEFT and Urbana Public Television. And we
David, it's been wonderful talking to you this morning. I really enjoyed our face-to-face, radio interview. It's been wonderful.
Me too. We're very lucky to do it. We are on the cusp, or I'm on the cusp of just not quite being a computer nerd. So we do what we can, and I'm very pleased that if this succeeds and it gets you what you want, and you can edit it. And I think what you're doing is you're recording it from your end too, so you will have
That's
it
right.
immediately. But this will go up on YouTube. We have like 300 programs on YouTube, and not quite so easy because YouTube is browsed by many people. So the more people you have, the less quality of the image. So we tend to work with the original image rather than with YouTube a lot. So, well, thank you for the opportunity that you're providing. Thank you for working with Dorothy, my sister, and I appreciate what you're doing, and thanks for adding a comment about agriculture, because I grew up with agriculture on the coast. I had a pet cow, and we had hogs, and we work with farmers in a community near the Bellinger River, and Dorrigo was up on the hill, and that was volcanic soil, because you have plate tectonics, and where you have movement, you have a volcano, and it's very rich soil. So sometimes the people from Thora would go up the hill 7 miles to Dorrigo and settle there in good soils. So your agriculture input is rather wonderful too. So this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, and this is Chiquita, and I think your name is Chris.
Chris, that's correct.
And a gallery in Albury, Australia, that is a partnership, and Chiquita is working with a number of different local artists, and I really applaud that. So onward and upward. It's thank you for being here. And
Thanks, David.
Pleasure. Thank you. Nice to meet you.